Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining this session on mine action and the climate question, what responsibility looks like in practice. Mine action operates in some of the most complex environments in the world. We rely on vehicles, generators, international travel, and long supply chains to deliver life-saving outcomes. These are not optional. They are fundamental to how we work. At the same time, there is a growing recognition across the humanitarian and development sectors that we need to better understand and take responsibility for our environmental footprint. But there is often a gap between that ambition and the operational reality many organizations face. This session is intended to explore that gap. Rather than focusing on targets or abstract commitments, we will look at what carbon measurement is actually telling us about how we operate, where emissions come from, what can realistically be influenced, and where constraints or trade-offs are unavoidable. We are joined by 4 speakers who bring a different perspective, from global context of conflicts and ambitions to sector-wide approaches to operational experience within mine action, and finally, practical approaches around mitigation and sequestration. So, to my right, I would like to introduce our speakers. Dr. Anna McKean, Senior Advisor, Mine Action and Environment from Conflict and Environment Observatory. Dr. McKean is a specialist in integrating environmental safeguards into humanitarian mine action and assessing war damage to the environment and biodiversity using open source intelligence and Earth observation. Next is Ms. Sonja Smith, is leading the Climate Action Accelerator Solutions and Climate Analytics teams, and is one of the thematic focal points for procurement and supply. She has almost 15 years of experience in the field of sustainability, specializing on purchasing and procurement standards. Next is Mr. Elliot Balt, is the Global Climate and Environment Advisor at the Mines Advisory Group, MAC, where he leads the organization's work on environmental responsibility and climate integration across humanitarian mine action and weapons and ammunition management programs. His work focuses on translating global standards into operational practice, ensuring that environmental management is both credible and derivable in complex, high-risk contexts. And finally, Mr. Alex Wostry is head of Hero Trees and Sustainability at Apopo and has more than 15 years of experience in agroecology, research, training, and monitoring. He specializes in developing programs that combine sustainable agriculture, agroforestry, climate resilience, biodiversity conservation, and livelihoods. The aim is not to present a single model or solution, but to surface practical insight and honest reflection that can help to move forward the conversation. I will now invite our first speaker, which is Dr. Anna McKean.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anna. I'm here to present one of areas of our work of Conflict and Environment Observatory. I will be talking about military emissions gap. So the climate crisis is an urgent threat to people, affecting livelihoods, health, economic stability worldwide. With the climate breakdown underway and accelerating, it is important that we are able to understand and minimize the emissions from all societal activities, whether it's in a peacetime or at war. However, there is currently a significant gap in understanding our global climate impact, the contribution of militaries and conflicts to the climate crisis. The military emissions gap is a gap between what governments are actually reporting and reported their military emissions and the true scale of the contribution to the climate crisis. This gap has 3 important components. The first one is that what governments are obliged to report to the United Nations Framework Convention on the Climate Change, also known as UNFCCC, which manage global climate action. The second one is no country has to report their military emissions to the UNFCCC. So there is no like obligations for the countries to report, and it's a decision to report in the way you want and what you want to actually to report. It's voluntary. So many countries don't report on their military emissions, or they aggregate them together with the civilian emissions, and which is simply excluding lots of possible emissions of the military sphere. So this creates a gap which has to be taken into account. And the third one is that, yes, as I said, they don't report, and it usually don't include the defense industry or military supply chain. If you look at the size of the military emissions, it's 5.5% of the global emissions. And if you look in the scale of the countries, so we have the first one as China, United States, India, and the military comes. If you look in terms of like other industries, we can look into the shipping industry, which is only 3%, which is less than military emissions. And then we have a big societal and political pressure on the shipping industry to decrease their emissions, while there is no such pressure at the moment on the military emissions. It's important to highlight that there was no methodology to calculate the emissions caused by during the conflict until the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, when the environmental degradation caused by the conflict started to be well documented, and we can say that it's the most well-documented conflict in terms of environmental damage so far. And on this slide, you can see the results of the work that was done by Leonard de Klerk and his team. The report they presented on the 4th anniversary of Ukraine's full-scale invasion in February, and they managed to develop a methodology. They managed to calculate the impact of the conflict on the environment and carbon accounting, and they showed that at the moment, at that time, in February, it was the same amount as emission by France, like annual France emission. So this methodology, which was developed, you can easily download it and look into it, and it can be replicated for other conflicts. And we can see that this is something that comes from a hard situation, but it leads to such a methodology that could help calculate the military emissions. Thank you. That's all from me for now.
Thank you. Can you?
No, thank you so much, Dr. McKean. That sets out a really important global context, particularly around what is currently not being fully captured or accountable for. Turning to the wider development and humanitarian sector, there has been a significant push in recent years around carbon measurement and accountability. Sonja, could you build on this by explaining what organizations are actually doing in practice and what carbon measurement is starting to change within the sector? Please.
Thank you very much. Maybe just a few words. Welcome everyone, and thank you for having me today. Just a few words on the Climate Action Accelerator, because I'm not sure if many of you know the organization. So we're a non-profit initiative. We're based in Geneva. We're aiming to mobilize a critical mass of organizations that deliver essential services to populations around the world. And we're specifically focusing on the international humanitarian and the health sector. In the future, we're also looking at higher education and research. We have more than 40 partners around the world, starting with large international organizations to very small local NGOs in Western Africa, for example. So we really have projects and partners almost around the world. So in Europe, really a focus on Africa, and we're starting also to have projects and partners in Asia. Our strategy is also to have more and more regional representation so that we also reduce our own travel-related emissions. So building on our work in Geneva, but also having a local representation. So I don't think I want to repeat what you said about the importance of acting on climate change. We have the last decade as being the hottest ever on record, 2024, the first time in history how we measure emissions that we actually depassed already the 1.5 degree threshold. With that comes also an expected explosion in needs. We also have increasing military conflicts, of course. And so the question for actors that deliver essential services is also how to deliver their mission, meeting growing needs, while also learning on the one hand to adapt to changing climate, because it already has impacts on operations on the ground, as well as how can we reduce our own impact in order not to contribute to a problem that we're trying to address. So I actually want to give a few high-level learnings we've been existing for the last 5 years, from our partners that we accompany from measurement to solutions, implementation, and really trying to share some learnings with you, also pointing you to resources. This is not something completely new. There are examples that we can all build on. So starting with footprint measurement, our advice is always start with the first, even almost always imperfect carbon footprint. Don't let yourself hold up by imperfect data. It's really, we have this idea of a good enough approach. There's a common international standard, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. There's also ISO standards. And then some marketing for our own organization. We also released a carbon footprinting toolkit that really aims to give very practical advice to organizations on how they can measure their emissions. We did an analysis of the sector-wide emissions of the humanitarian sector. So when we only look at the humanitarian sector, it's 35 million tons in 2022, which is roughly the same as the National Health Service in the UK, just to give you a bit of a comparison. We also see, and that's also reflected in the footprint of our partners, really a concentration of emissions. So it's most of the time, it's procurement, it's cash and voucher assistance, very specific to the humanitarian sector, and then energy, freight, and travel. We see that, as I said, reflected in the footprint of our partners. So almost, even if you haven't done the footprint yet, for the humanitarian sector, we know it's usually these emissions. Then when it comes to solutions, we always, on the one hand, advocate to really get started. So again, you don't have to wait for data. You can start with awareness raising, you can start with training your staff. So really, you can even start with recycling in the office. So it's really about starting to change the mindset of the organization and really celebrate early successes. Then usually there is some concentration in emissions now. So focus on the hotspots and also the key levers to reduce those emissions or other environmental impacts in a more mid to long-term perspective. And also very important, our experience is also we really need commitment at the highest leadership level in order to drive implementation. Then I just want to show you one concrete example about the concentration of emissions. So this is from MSF Supply and MSF Logistics. So these are the supply centers for Doctors Without Borders. And for them, 25 items account for almost 60% of the procurement-related footprint. So there's no need to work on thousands of articles. First focus on those 25 and you already have captured a large part of the procurement-related emissions. Then also, so our vision as an organization is really also climate solutions should be open source solutions. So we have a solutions hub online with generic solution fact sheets to help understand the topic. They are rather generic, geared towards organizations providing essential services. We have toolkits that are really about practical advice to implement solutions. So really with like templates, checklists, we try to be as practical as possible. And then we also have a number of webinars that are online for replay. And then last but not least, we're also currently developing an accelerator program where we want to get a number of organizations like collective cycle on board to really help accelerate and make it more accessible for smaller organizations to start their climate actions. Then I think I'm already probably over time. Then just a few last thoughts. So our experience shows that climate action aligned with science is really feasible, often also comes with, not all of them, but often comes with cost benefits. We really think there needs to be a thinking about what is business as usual, how can the operational model really be changed in order to make these drastic changes, and also climate smart actors will be more able to also deliver their mission in the future and really be fit for purpose in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sonia. That gives us a helpful sense of how carbon measurement is being approached across the sector. Bringing this into specific context of my action, I would like to turn to MAG. MAG has recently completed its first organization-wide carbon baseline, which provides a detailed picture of where emissions sit across operation. Elliot, could you share what this process reveals in practice, where emissions are concentrated, and what that tells us about how my action organizations actually operate?
Of course I can. So just to frame this in the IMAS standards, MAG has completed its first organisational baseline. It's been third-party quality assured for 2024. And it addresses the expectations within IMAS 0713. The bullet points with a full line address it directly, and then we're able to capture indirectly the impact of the use of raw materials through a carbon accounting approach. MAG in 2024 emitted 22,313 tonnes of CO2. We spent £98.5 million delivering mine action and WAM programming globally. We've looked at this headline figure in a number of different metrics. The first being the number of tonnes of CO2 per full-time employee, roughly 5,000 employees for the year. And that's a total of tonnes of CO2 per £1 million spent. I'm going to let you behind what those numbers mean. And for the first time, we're able to share what that data and where that data comes from. 80% of MAG's total footprint are found in 3 business areas. That's fuel use for our vehicles and generators. It's the business travel we do to get from A to B. And it's the procurement of goods and services, as highlighted in the broader humanitarian and development sector. Now, usually, an organisation wouldn't put these figures up for everyone to see, but what I want to do as part of our greenhouse gas protocol requirements of transparency, of disclosure, is actually show you where these emissions come from as an organisation delivering HMA and WAM work globally. MAG in 2024 burnt 2.2 million litres of diesel as an organisation. 25% of that, at least, was in generators globally. 481,000 litres of petrol went into our vehicles, accounting for 7,341 tonnes of carbon emitted. So about 33% of our footprint comes from fuel consumption alone. In addition, we did burn 200 tonnes of charcoal, which was surprising when we look at that from a climate lens, and I will return to that later. So our Scope 1 emissions, for those that don't know, are all of the emissions that we have control over in our vehicles and premises globally. Our Scope 2 emissions are the emissions we are responsible for, but are produced elsewhere. So that's predominantly the electricity that we purchase from grid systems. Now, our Scope 3 emissions, as expected and as spoken about across the broader development sector, account for the remaining 60% of our total. And 10% of those is that business travel that I spoke about. MAG did 13 million passenger kilometres of travel to get our staff to mine action task sites globally, to weapons and ammunition management task sites around the world. That's a lot. It's the equivalent of 567 continuous around the world flights. So in theory, we had someone up in the air 1.5 times per day, just going around the world. The reason I highlight this is because we are setting ourselves a target to reduce our emissions by 45%. Now, in order to do that, we have to take a systematic approach to data and to organisational business change in order to reach the commitments that MAG have set out publicly as we move forward. We've aligned our approach with the Paris climate commitments in order to try and meet that 1.5 degree raise in temperature. And whilst that has already been spoken to, been surpassed, MAG is still committed to a reduction in our emissions. Now, the easiest thing that we could do is do 45% less work, but that's not the point. MAG wants to deliver an emissions reduction of 45% whilst continuing to improve and increase the amount of work that we do globally. And in order to do that, we will have to change the way that we work. And that requires trade-offs. Trade-offs that I don't think we'd thought about before. Whether that's the operational feasibility of actually delivering an emissions reduction strategy at a task site, whether it's the costs and resources that are required to be input into delivering emissions reductions moving forward. But it's also the behaviours, the culture, and the people that we have at the organisation that will be required to change the way that we work as we move forward. Now, I've put an example here on the side to sort of highlight the trade-off that we have to make. Now, for me to come today to present on climate mitigation, I had two choices. I could fly from London on a return trip for the cost of roughly £100 and emit 355 tonnes of CO2. It's incredibly convenient. However, I could have taken the train. It would have emitted 60 kilos, but it would have cost our organisation nearly £600. The convenience is low. What hasn't been reflected here is the fact I have childcare responsibilities tomorrow. So when we think about these emission reduction strategies, we also have to place this in the way that we work with the staff, how the staff turn up to work, and actually trade off between these emission reduction approaches and strategies within an organisation. Now, I'm not asking for your moral judgment. I'm happy with the decision that I made, but over time, we will have to change the way that we work, and whether that's from a remuneration perspective, in order to facilitate my travel and childcare, or having other people represent. We're looking at the integration of AI into the work that we do, a more hybrid approach to meetings as we move forward. There are a number of business activities that we will have to change, and I highlight that today. I think it is important. Now for MAG, in order to meet our emissions reduction strategy and meet a 45% reduction, we will have to address two key areas. The first is that fuel consumption that I spoke about earlier. An example I will give in the process of transparency. In our Iraq operations, we burnt 313,000 litres of fuel running generators in 1 year. That offers about £500,000 of expenditure, $500,000 of expenditure that could be reinvested elsewhere. The challenge is, in the current financing model of humanitarian mine action, capital expenditure up front isn't as possible as we would like at the moment. The long-term operational expenditure and return on investment of solarization is plain for everyone to see. So we have to find ways in order to invest in the change that I spoke about as we move forward. Again, the second piece, which I've highlighted already, is an improved travel management approach. But again, the main drivers of that will not be the reduction in travel. It will be changing the way in which people interact with their employment, interact with their deployments, and deliver mine action as an international organisation globally. Lastly, I think I've got 1 minute. Lastly, I wanted to highlight a quick win. From taking a carbon accounting approach as an organisation, we have applied a climate lens to our normal business operations. I mentioned earlier that we burnt 200 tonnes of charcoal as an organisation in 1 year. In Laos, that was about 94 tonnes of charcoal for cooking staff meals. When we applied a climate lens to that business activity, that one thing that we do, we were able to change the way that we work and reduce our charcoal consumption by 50%, saving 125 tonnes of CO2 per year just by providing staff with electric stoves. Now that sounds simple, but we'd never applied a climate lens to the work that we do to achieve these kind of outcomes. So just wanted to have that as a quick win before handing over to Alex. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Elliot. That really brings us, our discussion into operational reality, where emissions are coming from and the kinds of constraints organizations are working with. Turning now to Apopo, your work includes land-based approaches such as reforestation and syntropic agroforestry. Alex, could you talk us through how these approaches fit into the picture, what role they can play in mitigation or adaptation, and importantly, what their limits are in addressing organizational emissions?
Surely, and it's a big honor to have now the last presentation. It's a little bit a lively example on how Apopo is doing this. Apopo, famous for working with rats and dogs in the demining sector, and always the nose forward to smell for innovations. And basically, I would say Apopo already since 2015, the CEO was really engaged in thinking about getting a carbon neutral footprint and engaged in activities like tree planting. Next to this, also as an introduction, Apopo also spearheaded the way in thinking more on outcomes. Basically, in demining, where we think on the square meter release, it's just the output thinking, where we do also activities where straight after demining we link farmers to sustainable agriculture initiatives. And basically these two activities kind of working now very well together, and I want to walk you now through 4 slides which give you a good example on how that all summed up quite well. But first of all, yes, we have already for many years an environmental policy, and in this we also have enshrined climate change. It works very simple. We have the first step is to know, then it's also to protect and to act, whereby with knowing, yes, we have also done a carbon footprint baseline. It's quite an intensive approach. I also discussed with Elliot about it. So it takes a lot, and I hope in the future artificial intelligence is helping us doing this, because basically you have to go through all the receipts. There you find the emissions with each transaction, what we have done. But basically, yes, it was a very important step. Then it's also protecting, so all that what we are doing, let's do it with awareness and in a way that we don't do any harm. And then acting, which we also understand that we really put measures where we can protect the environment, where we basically also use our monitoring skills to constantly learning. And basically I put you here a nice picture. It's basically the team around the reforestation group, and inclusive our CEO in the middle, and they proudly stand in front of 6,000 trees from a nursery. And that's just as a practical example. These trees were provided to our staff in Tanzania, where most of our over 100 employees have also farms, and they could integrate trees, which we of course monitored with our monitoring system. And that's just a small, beautiful, small contribution, but also very beautiful because it's actually going into the DNA of the organization, that people know that they are actually agents of change, and they could actually really contribute to reducing a bit our carbon footprint, but also, yes, being there engaged in this and hopefully bringing this also to their communities. So all in all, we are doing this in all our departments, and basically we also just launched another policy where we also integrate the context of environment and climate change in safe gardening. So to the next slide, because before we go completely into the trees, I just have to show this lovely dog picture. The hero dogs, yeah, they are also, I have to say this, we are doing this already, and it was not our intention in the beginning to start with training dogs, which started quite later after excelling with rats, that we becoming climate champions. But what we have seen is that when we work with the dogs and we lead them on the leash and they go through the bush, what you see here, all the trees, yeah, so that actually allows us to do this without cutting down the bush. It's actually no need to go in with heavy equipment compacting the soil. So it's really a double win, and it's actually even pretty efficient. So basically, that's something what we are doing. And of course, what is always good now to mention also to our donors that we are capable of in doing it. Otherwise, go to the next step, the practical, where we can use it also operational-wise in the field. The solar installation, we heard already with the reduction of charcoal, etc. Yes, we have done this. You have the really limitations. We were facing them, but yes, we have to nevertheless innovate there and try to find out solutions. But what I want to talk you now a little bit more is that with these two approaches which I mentioned before, getting the carbon footprint neutral and also working in the nexus sector, Apopo has launched an own department which I'm leading, which is the Hero Trees department. And basically there we're trying to excel linking farmers to agroforestry and agroecological sound farming methods. And what we have been able so far is planting now more than 100,000 trees. But yes, with Esri, we are doing really monitoring. I mean, I think that's really the unique thing what the demining sector brings, that we are all really experts in monitoring. I think some of the many sectors, they don't know so well how the demining sector, so that's really actually an asset what we are bringing with us. And yes, when I'm showing you the trees, I'm showing you the surviving trees. We have monitored, we are checking our projects, and currently these are 95,000 trees. It's approximately 2019 tons of carbon dioxide which we could sequestrate. Basically, what we measured in 2023 are 2,000 tons carbon emission from Apopo, which basically I just did the maths. It's very equal to what you have, just that your organization is much bigger. But it's approximately, we are all there quite similar. And yes, the shocking result is yes, a lot of traveling and all those things. But nevertheless, that we could see now and kind of, yes, we are almost there. But of course, in the meantime, Apopo has grown. And we have to still work to be able to do this. And basically, the nice thing in the approach, what we are doing it, that we are supporting farmers straight away after the mining also to doing activities, is that it's not only the climate, that we have also reduced soil erosion, we have better water retention, which is a very classical climate action example in not only going into mitigation, but also in adaptation. And it's also our love for trees, which we show that we have planted more than 83 different tree varieties, which is also very important. Biodiversity should never be forgotten next to climate change, because climate change we can reverse, but biodiversity is lost forever. So we're also trying to cope this. And the most important thing is that when you do it right and you have a good approach, you actually benefit the people. So basically with this we have a really beautiful examples where we could improve farmer households, all monitored with the Esri systems, where we can show clearly that more of 70% could increase income over 20% with doing sustainable farming initiatives, and at the same time reducing chemical inputs, protecting the soil, and leading also a step towards mitigation. So basically, all in all, that what I want to say, it's not only in mitigation with this approach, it's really this climate action approach where we also think on adaptation and resilience. And now let's go to the last one, the Nexus approach, which I talked already about it. It's the Minefields to Ricefield project, funded by FCDO, where we work now for more than 3 years with communities in Cambodia, where we had tremendous success and where we started with rice, and it was organic rice. Already organic rice helps to reduce the carbon footprint quite drastically, because all the nitrogen fertilizer, as soon as it's getting wet and the rice fields are wet, it goes into the atmosphere and is really a climate change killer. So basically here we could do already good, but over the time and now with the experience with the trees, bringing this carbon reduction idea closer to the nexus, we are now at the moment working on a new 3 years phase with FCDO, where we, next to income, we are also measuring the diversification of income, which is a very good climate resilient indicator, where we are showing that when we bring in good initiatives after the demining, that farmers can pick up even more ideas on how to diversify. So that will help them if there is a drought or a flood, that they are not depending on one crop. And on the other side, we are also looking here that we can measure the carbon sequestration. So one additional feature on our ESRI dashboards is that we do the tree counts of the agroforestry system, and that even gives a hint on how this project leads into it. But basically, these are now great opportunities because they're attractive probably for the demining sector to think about this, and it's not that we can solve all the problems and probably be coming from 100 to 0, but we can have innovative approaches, work with partners, link it, and make the best out of it, so that we can assure that the land where we put out the landmines is afterwards also farmed in a way that it's good for the people, good for the climate. And basically, yes, of course, in the reality check, like I said, we have not managed to do all the things that we can say from the work per se. We are 0, and it still needs innovative thinking, but probably an accelerator is quite helpful to learn from, and organizations which are spearheading this, who are sharing this, that there is a great peer-to-peer learning. And nevertheless, what I wanted to show you with this a little bit disruptive idea of bringing different parts together, it was able for us to save the land, not only from the landmines, but also making it into something really resilient and something which leads into a prosperous, sustainable future. So that's from my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for highlighting how carbon sequestration and climate adaptation programming can contribute to actively manage emissions from mine action interventions. I would like to open this up into a broader discussion across the panel. There's a clear tension here between what organizations can influence and what's shaped by realities of how we operate. From your perspective, where do organizations have real agency to reduce emissions, and where are they working within constraints they can't easily shift? So any member of the panel that would like to?
Yeah, I can answer that. I mean, I think from the slides that I shared, where emissions are concentrated, and it's not just the mine action sector, it's the development sector, it's the broader humanitarian space. It's 3 spaces. It's fuel consumption, and that's fossil fuel consumption specifically, and particularly in a world where fossil fuel prices are going through the roof. There is a return on investment argument that can be made. Sometimes climate change, you lose the room, but when we talk about budgets, we talk about being able to cut costs in the long term. Solarization is the way to go, and that will have a drastic impact on reducing emissions. The second is the business travel, and we will have to change the way that we operate as a sector moving forward. People don't want to address that, and it's difficult. You have the issue of collective responsibility. It will require a sector to change the way that we operate, because an individual's travel doesn't really change the dial. So we need to work on a way as a sector, as a mine action sector globally, and how we address those two.
I can maybe add, and I can only echo what you say. Maybe just with the example from the humanitarian sector specifically, that is really also faced with deep budget cuts and constraints. So at least, at the moment, the focus is really on where are co-benefits. So be it in terms of costs, thinking about solarization, for example, where return on investment is very often possible in 5 to 7 years. But also for beneficiaries, for example, beneficiaries in terms of energy security or fuel costs. So we have a pilot project, which is a hospital in Chad, which is now almost running at 80% on solar energy, comes with really clear cost benefits, but also really like stability in terms of energy supply. And I think it's really how can we get towards operating models that really integrate the resilience, the adaptation, and the mitigation parts at the same time.
Now, there has been a strong emphasis on carbon accounting today, but does it actually change behavior? From your experience, has measurement led to different decisions or ways of working, or is it still largely a reporting exercise?
I can. I think it's very important to do the actual calculations and to see where your organization stand. And what Sonia said today is that don't to be too harsh on the actual where you start, but it's your starting point from where you can move forward. And I think Elliot's example today about Lao, that they used the charcoal just because it was done like this all the time, and then like suddenly they figure out that because of the calculations you did, and so you can make this change, which is really nice, and it's a way to move forward.
Shall I just very quickly, and I think it also helps with decision making. You know, when you have the actual figures, the conversation goes from we think we can make impact to, okay, we actually show we can make real impact. So when we work with our partners on the solutions and the trajectory modeling, we really take the baseline and then say, if we apply these solutions, then we can actually reduce emissions by X%. And that is quite powerful, I think, in discussions to really be able to have this, have the figures that support your arguments, and also, again, like, they don't have to be perfect, they just have to be good enough.
But maybe to add on it, because basically when we are really talking about climate change and looking into the current geopolitical situation, where we are bombing gas fields and whatever, human being at the moment, what we are doing is really crazy. So probably there is no political solution in the close future. So it's basically working on climate change. Any organization has to do it. And like I said before, the great opportunity what we have in the mining sector, we are all champions in monitoring. And we can really set here examples where other sectors can learn from it. And I think that should motivate us. And basically, yes, the data helps us to set goals. And when we achieve goals, we should celebrate them. And we should celebrate them loud, and we should have great parties that it's motivating to do it. Because in the end, saving our planet, that should be something which we have to do with all our efforts, and that should be the purpose which is driving. And I think especially we know what purpose is. In the mining sector, everybody looks to us and says, wow, you're doing a really good job, wonderful, it's purpose. And this purpose which we have already putting in place with the mining, we also have to widen up that we can bring this into the environmental perspective, and with this being really just everybody has to join. We have to create this environment.
I just want to add on to what you said, because I think it's really like deviating a bit from just the measurement part, but it's really also how do you approach this internally with your staff or externally. And we really try to go away from a conversation that is, oh, you know, we're so bad, we have so many emissions, which is very negative, which is really like making a bad consciousness. And just saying there are actually opportunities, and it is, you know, it can strengthen our social mission. We can have great co-benefits for the people we serve, and we really also like to change the communication and the general approach, be it internally with the staff and also externally. So we really take it when we do workshop with our partner, really from an opportunity perspective, and not from a, oh, you're doing, you know, you have so many missions, you're doing really a bad thing.
Can I just, one thing to add on that, I think it would be great if we could see the mine action sector specifically be more confident in sharing this information. You know, I think MAG this is the first time a mine action agency has put the data out there to show the impact that we're having, to show where that is coming from. And I really hope that doesn't translate into MAG's doing a bad thing for the climate. That's the end of the work. You have to take a transparent approach to disclosure in order to address the issue. If you put your head in the sand, we can pretend that it's not happening. But if you want to address the emissions that result from the great work, and it is brilliant work that every organization and everyone is a part of here, you have to take a data-led approach, and you have to be transparent about where the problems are, because you can't solve a problem that you don't know.
Well, thank you all of you. And also, with an increasing focus on delivering solutions, positive action on carbon, whether that's implementing new technology, carbon offsetting, or organizational behavior change. From your perspective, where do these conversations reach oversimplifying the reality of emissions or in my action?
In terms of oversimplifying, I think, yeah, you can get the data and you can put it up on the screen, but it costs money to fix these problems. And so once you get to a point that you know what the issue is, we need a collective effort to start addressing it. And I think it goes back to that last question about if we're all transparent about the problem that we're causing, we can work together to collective solutions, such as the work that Apopo are doing on carbon sequestration, and the work that colleagues in the room are doing in terms of land rehabilitation, whether that's our colleagues over at Halo DRC, HI. I think it's brilliant work, but there's more that can be done.
Maybe just specifically on the carbon offset part to the question. So I think there's in the various guidelines that have been set in the frameworks, that it's really like established what is key is to first reduce emissions. That's the first step, and then any like residual emissions can be offset. And then I think it's really about then, if you go down that path, it's on the one hand, it needs to be calculated separately from your footprint, and also there really needs to be a real quality review of offsets being used, and really importantly also, it cannot be used to say, we now have zero emissions. That's not very, that's not the right way of doing it. It's really about calculating them separately, communicating transparently about the use of offsets, and really watching out for the quality.
Yeah. And now looking ahead a few years, what would realistic progress actually look like for my action sector? Not in terms of long-term ambition, but what we could genuinely expect to see change in the next 3 to 5 years.
If I'm looking at mine action in particular, it would be really good to have a carbon footprint calculator for the field operations, because at the moment we're using like ICRC carbon footprint calculator, but it's mostly for the office, for the transport, but it would be good to have and develop the field operator calculator. And if it's from the perspective of the military emissions gap that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, it would be really good to have to develop a standard approach for all countries to report on military emissions, and it's not to shame them, but to find the ways to improve it and to make it better, because it has such a big impact on the global emissions, as it was like 5.5%.
I would add one thing, that I think if in the next 3 to 5 years we can have increased recognition that climate change is making our work harder. The example I can give is periods of extreme heat and drought require investment in water bowsers to soften land in order to do clearance operations. So as climate change is impacting the areas of operation, a recognition and an increased recognition from a global perspective would really help to address some of those issues as we move forward. And secondly, yes, a standardized approach to carbon accounting, transparency, disclosure, so that we can collectively solve our contribution to climate change, so that we've got safe and productive land today and tomorrow. There's no point, in my opinion, as a climate advisor, releasing land for safe and productive use for 1 or 2 years, if in 10 years' time, the land cannot be put to use for communities that we serve.
Yes, and with the experience which we collect, that we're really going in this direction to have a true cost accounting, I think that would be probably good also when we make our projects and sell our projects, that it's very clear which footprint comes with them, and that maybe with the future, when we have a lot of experience collected and working openly, that we know what a good standard in implementing a project could be. And I think when we are working collaboratively on this, it's really possible, and it will make the things in few years already significantly better.
Yeah, I just want to follow up what Elliot said about the challenges, challenges that operators face in different countries. Last year, SEOPS worked with NPA to analyze how Greenfield tool is rolled out in 7 NPA programs. And we worked with Middle East, we worked with Southeast Asia, with Africa, with European countries. And all of them face, like operators face problems of a climate change and issues that have to address in their operations. They have lots of time, like stand-down time, when they cannot go, cannot work, or it's a dust storms in Iraq, or it's a high temperatures, or it's a flooding. But operators have to address these issues, and they need to change their shifts. They need to find what to do with their staff when they cannot work, and to report it to donors, like how they spend this money. So, and these extreme conditions happen more and more often, and this is what we are all facing in our work globally. Thank you.
No, thank you to all the panelists. I think that you have raised very important points, especially for many of us that will be engaging in the review process of the Convention on Cluster Munition. And there's a push also to mainstream climate change and environmental considerations in many of the outcome documents, including the next action plan. So I think that for many of us, this is very useful to start as a starting point of the conversation, but also ahead and beyond this review process. So mindful of the time, now we would like to maybe take some questions, but before that, I would like to maybe ask to the room for consideration. From your perspective, where is the sector getting this wrong when it comes to emissions and environmental responsibility, and what are we overlooking in practice? And what would make it easier for your organization to reduce emissions in practice? What needs to change beyond your control? So I would like to open the floor from the room. And please, when you raise your hand, identify your country or the organization that you represent. So please don't be shy. We don't bite. Yeah, sure.
My name is Nigel Elway. I'm a director of the Revive campaign and an advisor on the impact of explosive weapons in the UK Parliament. What you've all been talking about is sort of the impact on the environment of mine action rather than the explosive weapons themselves. But just to plug, if I may, on the 16th of July in Parliament, we're running a conference in partnership with the School of Oriental African Studies, Cranfield University, and using an example case study, that's what I was looking for, from the Mekelle University in Ethiopia, on the impact on the environment of explosive weapons. And I actually think that we need to have a section within that conference on the impact that mine action itself makes. I mean, I liked Alex's thing about the dogs and not having to clear vegetation. I think that's quite an important point. So I'd just like to say, if anybody is interested in participating in that conference, either speak to me or my colleagues Sarah and Jerry, who's at the conference somewhere. Thanks.
Thank you so much for this kind invitation, and I'm sure that there will be a lot of interested stakeholders approaching you after this session. And
sorry, we have also, I mean, at MAG, we have piloted carbon accounting for the destruction of UXOs, and so it's something we could certainly look at exploring further. In that initial carbon accounting approach to the disposal of ordnance, the actual percentage in terms of tons of CO2 is actually incredibly low in comparison to the sort of support services and delivery of a mine action intervention, but happy to explore that further with yourselves or anyone in the room who has methodologies that we could apply for better and more accurate accounting.
Anyone of the one would like also to react? Or yes, please.
Thank you very much. Isam Garib, Mile Organization for Environmental Protection. My question to Mr. Elliot from MAG organization, and they mentioned about all the measures taken about the carbon offset, which is great, but also how they managed during the demining about the impact of the heavy machines on the soil and also the waste from the explosive destructions. You mentioned about the fuel and emissions, how you measure it, but if these 2 points, if you mention it, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The environmental impact of mine action is not just carbon emissions. I think what we've tried to highlight today, specifically in this session, is that there is an issue that I think is slightly overlooked in the mine action sector at the moment in terms of emissions to the climate from the work that we do. I think more work has been ongoing in terms of soil sampling, understanding the impact of contamination on land, soils, water networks. But you are absolutely right, more work could be done. And I don't think carbon accounting alone is the only solution. So, the work that CEOPS and MPA have done on the Greenfield tool, Halo and MAG have done on adapting that tool into environmental screening internally, does capture that in a different way. And it's the same with the issue of waste generation as well. So I'm not saying, I don't think anyone at the front is saying that the only thing we should be looking at is the emissions associated with the work, but it is something that I think at the moment is overlooked in the mine action sector and needs a greater focus moving forward. So I hope that answers your question. I know it's a slight politician's answer to one side, but yeah, I hope that's clear.
If I may just add to what has been said, maybe also from the perspective from our experience with the humanitarian and health sector, I would agree that the carbon accounting and really the focus on reducing emissions has been overlooked so far. So we also believe that there's really a need to really push that topic on the agenda. And at the same time, when we work with our partners, our roadmaps always include climate and other environmental elements, and we think it's really important. And then it's much harder to actually properly account for other environmental impacts, so it's a more of a qualitative approach. For example, we work a lot on waste with our partners, like local waste pollution. But it's really an integrated part of the roadmaps as well, and not just the climate section. So I would really echo the point you made and say really we need to look at everything from an integrated perspective.
Yeah, mindful of the time, as a final reflection, I would like to ask each panelist in one sentence, what is one thing that the sector needs to do differently to take climate responsibility seriously in practice?
I think to be willing to do these calculations and to see where they stand now and from that move forward.
So really speaking from a more, sort of external organization, I think it's really sharing the good examples, but also the failures, what went wrong, and really, help with this peer-to-peer learning by sharing good practices, good examples, and the failures.
Difficult going last. I think, in a sentence, I'd like to see a commitment, not just from the mine action delivery operators, but from the wider policy donor community, to accepting there's a problem and then addressing it. So data first, action second, for a better future.
And I think also important is to check on the behavior change. So it should be not a top-down thing, which is coming now from a department where we all making everyone angry. I think it's more, when we do this, we have to work with the whole team and ask the team what can be done, and to make it a participatory project. It's a kind of a bottom-up thing where everybody then can identify him or herself and what should make the whole thing strong and sustainable. Yeah.
I just want to say one thing. I wanted to comment on Alex's presentation. I was so impressed that you not just planted 95,000 trees, but you actually monitored them. Because sometimes organizations report, we planted so many trees, but they have no idea what happened to them. Afterwards, maybe something was wrong, something didn't work. But actually provided the monitor and being able to say, yes, they actually grow, it's very impressive. Thank you. Very, very inspiring, I would say.
And time consuming.
Yeah, I see someone in the audience. I might give you an opportunity, but try to be very brief. Yes.
Yeah, very brief. Sorry.
No,
thank you very much. Hakimi from Afghanistan involved in mine action since 3 decades. So on just 2 things, it was very impressive. And the question from behind, one about use of dogs. This is the safest operation to save the environment, the dogs. And so it needs a little bit effort to use it properly, and the environment will be safe. This is one thing. About the flail machines, what was the impact on the environment? These big machines, they are clearing huge land, but at the same time, there are 2 problems. One, the emission of carbon dioxide. The second is the destruction of soil structure. This is another thing, which will create problem for the farmers and the communities, again, use the lands. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And with this, I would like to invite everyone a round of applause for our speakers and panelists. And thank you all for your participation and constructive engagement. Thank you so much.